My first question for all of you is, how has 2020 been for BareBones?
Quiet, extremely quiet. Yeah. I mean, so at the end of 2019, we put out our sophomore record, Rival Minds, and we were kind of in the middle of that album cycle as COVID started to develop at the start of the year. And then, like every band in the world, the brakes were just hit, everything was put on hold, and we just really didn't know what we were going to do and how long it would be before we get back to playing live. And I mean, when that was what, March? We began that show in March.
That was April that we had to can, and then July as well.
Yeah, and now we're in November and we're practicing the second time. We're playing as a band this year, second time we've been together as a band this year, so quite quiet.
Even though all of it sounds quiet, I'm sure fans would like to know, are there any plans for another upcoming album or EP release?
Definitely at some stage, but I think for now we're pretty happy to just record like individual singles and put those out, and just with Spotify and with streaming platforms these days, it's a little bit more convenient and a little bit more streamlined to kind of just put out a song at a time, and the response to the last couple of singles that we put out has been really good. So
it's a lot more powerful, much more powerful way of releasing music, and it's also sort of a lot more engaging. We release more music more regularly as opposed to a large chunk of music infrequently.
Yeah, I guess as well, like on the aspect of things being quiet on the sort of front end of things, it did give us the opportunity to really get back into writing sooner than we probably would have if COVID hadn't happened, which led to Avarice, our new single we put out last month. That new single out, which was all written and recorded during COVID, there was the difficulties to that as well. Doing a video clip when you didn't have 5 people in a room, for example, so it's like working your way around those sort of situations.
Well, we'll go back to Spotify because that's something that I wanted to ask you about. But my specific question for you guys is, can you tell your fans how the songs Thick as Thieves and Crawl the Night came together? So writing, recording, because they're really successful on Spotify. So
thanks, man. Thick as Thieves was a song that we wrote in the cycle of bad habits. So that was our first full-length album, and that song just sort of started with a riff that our old guitarist brought to the table, and then Chris, our drummer, sort of worked it into a bit more of a full-on song.
You wrote the verses, didn't you?
I don't remember. I don't know, but yeah, with that one, it was kind of like just a song that was a part of the album cycle. And then when we heard it, we were like, oh man, I think this song should be the first one on the album. It's got really good energy, and it was the first song that we put out off that album. We did a video clip for it. Yeah, that was the first single that we put out off that album, and we just thought it was like a pretty good representation of how the album goes from there on out. And it was one that, got quite a good reception through Spotify, and it's become a bit of a fan favorite live, which is cool. And then Crawl the Night, was that the first song that we started writing?
It was the first one I remember you brought to the album. It was one of, it was definitely in the first.
Gold Leaf was the first song that we wrote for that. That was the song that Chris wrote, and so it came with those really interesting riffs that kicked that off, and it was kind of like this is like this mad sort of Pantera vibe to it, like this heavy groove.
You pretty much brought that to the band, like as it is. Like things changed along the way, but that was the song where we were like, okay, we get it. Just from the first time you sent us that first demo.
Well, I think it was like also too, like we consciously made we had a discussion before writing for Rival Minds about trying to develop something a little bit heavier And as I said, like it's got some vibes, but some more like the old school metal, like from an older generation, which I think is something which we're all pretty into. So it kind of felt pretty natural to kind of pull together something like that.
I think that's why that one connected as well, is it's kind of got a lot of those older Pantera sort of vibes, which a lot of people aren't doing these days. So yeah, I think Crawler Night's one that people got into. It's a bit of a throwback and something a bit different for us as well. So.
Alright. Well, whilst we're on the subject of writing, before this interview, I listened to all your material right from 2013 to your latest album, Rival Minds. What I wanted to ask this band in particular was, how did the sound shift so much? Because there aren't many bands out there that change their sound so radically. In short, your band has gone from hard rock to nearly all out screamo. So tell us about the fundamental creative shift. I just found it interesting.
Yeah, I think like
Members is a huge part of it.
Yeah, we've had some member changes along the way, but I think it's all been pretty natural, man. Like we just sort of, when we first started the band, we were writing that kind of music, and then as it's just gone on, it's never really been like we've had little conversations here or there, like, oh, it'd be cool to do something a little bit heavier, but for the most part, it's just been what we write. And
I think another big thing as well is when the band started, there was only 4 of us. It was a 4-piece band, and one thing, from 2013 now to 2020, obviously everybody matures, but one thing that I think we all as a collective sort of learned was the live setting, and songs that connected well in a live setting, which would tend to shape things moving forward in that regard. But I think also just then, a change with what we were listening to at the time. Who knows what the next record would sound like,
But yeah, it's kind of a weird thing, because I think a lot of bands, like you hear from one record to the next, and there's like a drastic style change, and you can really clearly tell this band's made a definitive decision to do a left turn here, whereas like we've never done that. We've always just kind of been like, oh, it's time to write some new songs, and then we write some new songs and they sound a bit different, and then we just kind of roll with that. So it's never really like a forced thing. I think it's just the way it's always been.
It's ever been a conscious
I
decision.
think also to the other thing too is that like a lot of rock bands where we don't we have a bit of a habit of not putting out of writing and releasing stuff probably as quickly as other bands as well. So when we're not releasing stuff like on a pretty strict 2-year cycle or yearly cycle, something like that, we have a lot of time in between to develop, and trends change, taste changes, and that's going to naturally kind of give us a little bit of growth and the development and sound, I think, from that time period.
Little things as well, like between Bad Habits and Rival Minds, we decided to adjust tunes on the guitars, just as like sort of we've done the drop D, let's see what drop C sharp feels like to write in, just as literally let's see what it feels like to write in, and we started to vibe on those sort of like tonalities that are coming across in that, which I think then again shaped how the songwriting into that evolved as well. So just little things along the years, which if you're listening to Villains and then you're listening straight to Rival Minds, it can be quite a drastic change. But when you look at the actual time period of the band and the things that have changed in that period, as Tom said, it's not like a complete drastic change. It's like an evolution over those years.
One thing I would say is each song, we've kind of, whether it's intentional or not, I know like from my perspective it's a bit more intentional, but like they're a bit more sort of exploring one genre or subgenre, and they kind of, we're not afraid to sort of tilt that way and take more influence from it. Especially as we're thinking of doing more singles now, like because you're not confined to the constraints of an overall thematic feel for an album, we can kind of go a bit further with an influence. Especially like I know with Avarice, we were definitely like going down a particular vibe, and what we're going to, probably explore in the future is just going further different genres and having fun with that.
Yeah, when you're not doing like 12 songs for an album, it doesn't have to be as uniform, so it kind of gives us the opportunity to put out songs that we dig and that you don't really have to consider it in a context of an album. It's just kind of like its own thing, so that's pretty cool too.
Going back into the Spotify thing I mentioned earlier, most of your songs have received a lot of streams via Spotify. So my question is, how has this band been able to get an impressive amount of streams?
Spotify is pretty cool these days, where it's sort of replaced radio in a sense, whereas bands, 10, 20 years ago, if you were putting out a track, you'd pitch that to a radio station, and then you'd kind of hope that it gets played on the radio. It's kind of a similar thing with Spotify, where now they have their own editorial playlists, and you as a band submit to the editors of Spotify your track, and if they like it, then they'll add it to these playlists. So that's a way that you're getting these songs out to people who maybe wouldn't otherwise come across your band, because they're sort of subscribed to the Spotify algorithm, and then through what they already listen to, they get BareBones kind of thrown on their lap. So we've been lucky in that sense that Spotify have been really good to us and given us some good playlisting. Other than that, I think that we have just through the years built up a following sort of all around the world, which is really crazy. Spotify gives you the stats of sort of where people are listening from as well. So we are branching out of just like when we first started back in 2013, most of the people who were listening to our music were located in Sydney, or at least within Australia, whereas now it's kind of like a little bit more global, and I think just having more people to put the music out to results in more streams and that kind of thing. We're not just relying on our own social circles, it's getting put out there to larger audiences.
So all of you, well done for being signed to Resist Records. My question is, how did that come about?
We played a show. So Graham from Resist Records tours bands as well, and one of the bands that he tours out to Australia is Every Time I Die. But especially when we started out, we were like a pretty big influence on us, so we were really stoked to get the chance to play that gig. And we played that gig, and then we chatted to Graham from Resist, and he was pretty impressed with the band, and then sort of asked what our next steps were, and it was a pretty lengthy process, right? Like, we were talking to him for a while.
Yeah, so we submitted to Resist to support Every Time I Die the first time we played with them. And Graham, who owns Resist Records, was directly responsible for booking those supports, and that's how we fell under his radar through Finland, I'd say it was.
Yeah.
And as Tom said, we just kept in contact with him, and then he put out Cutthroat Living and supported Every Time I Die for a second time. It was fun, rare. So we played with him 3 times.
Yeah.
But it was quite a long
He sort of always said, when you guys are ready for an album, come and chat to me. And so we just sort of stayed in contact with him, and then we got to a point where we were wanting to do an album, and we went back to Graham and said, would you be interested in helping us out with the album? And he had a bit of a listen to what we were doing, and he was keen to get on board. And with Graham and with Resist, it's a really relaxed sort of environment, so it's maybe not what people would expect with a record label. We didn't sit down and put pen to paper and sign a contract.
Eating burritos.
Yeah,
we caught a burrito with Graham, and it was like, you want to be part of Resist?
Yeah, it's kind of a handshake deal, and it's kind of just a chill friendship kind of vibe that he then will give us his opinion, but I think we're in a position where we can do whatever we want, and that's pretty rare for a signed band. If you're on a record label, generally they have expectations and ideas of what you're going to do, whereas with Graham, it's just he's on board and he backs us, but we're allowed to do whatever we want, which is really
I think
refreshing.
that's also impressive fact that you're on a label with the likes of Parkway Drive, for example, and just how relaxed Resistors run in those regards. So I think we really lucked out with that label.
Definitely, yeah. Iconic for this country.
Yeah, oh yeah, 100%. I mean, we all grew up going to shows that Resist were putting on and listening to bands that were on Resist at the time. You know, and every heavy music player in Australia has, around this age has been influenced by Parkway Drive as well.
Yeah.
So being on the same level with those guys, and then you've got the likes of Polaris who are coming up to the label as well, which is really exciting to watch those guys. But it's great to see that Graham also takes on, you know, just a variety of bands, like smaller hardcore bands and stuff, and just has this really good sort of family of artists on the roster, which is really great.
So you talked, with that answer there, you mentioned a band that you toured with, but my question is a bit more specific. I'm not going to ask you all the bands you toured with, but what I will ask is, I have heard that you've toured with a lot of successful bands, because I heard it through another interview on Reddit. But out of all those band tours, what has been the most memorable one?
Shit, man, there's been a couple. I guess we can take it in turns.
Oh yeah.
I would say for me, the most memorable tour. The most memorable tour would be Rise Against, because I can remember it and some of the other big tours that we've done. So yeah, I'm going to say the tour that we did with Rise Against, off the back of the release of Bad Habits. It was like sort of our second time doing a really big tour like that, so I think we were a little bit more comfortable with the process, and they were just such cool people, such big crowds. I think we learned a lot playing in those environments. What about you?
Yeah. Oh, definitely Rise Against for me, because that was my first with you.
Yeah.
I played like my first show with you with like 100 people in Hideaway Bar like 3 weeks before, and then suddenly I'm in an arena in Perth.
Yeah.
You weren't there for that one either. Yeah, I just remember it was like I have to. I spent weeks like practicing my ass off, going like I have to make sure I actually look comfortable in front of all these people too. Yeah, that was such a major learning curve for me, and just yeah, it was definitely one of the most memorable experiences I've had doing music for sure. I love that tour.
Yeah, but mine would have to be Stone Sour. I mean, the first night of the Stone Sour tour, obviously with Corey Taylor, the frontman, also frontman of Slipknot, probably one of the biggest rock stars in the world. We're sitting there in our green room, you know, cracking a few beers. There's a knock on the door, and we look up, and Corey Taylor's standing at our door to come in, introduce himself to us, thank us for being on the tour with him. And that was day one, and the rest of the tour, those guys, Corey and the rest of the Stone Sour band and crew were just absolutely amazing. I mean, I remember talking to their tech, who used to tech for Slayer. So just all these stories from the road about what it was like touring with Slayer, and, you know, for somebody who grew up listening to Slayer, it's just like absolutely amazing. But we'd go out and have beers with those boys every night of the tour, and that tour for us was our first really sort of playing in stadium-sized venues, and we learned a lot from that tour in particular. I think, which, as Tom said, really shaped into how we performed on the Rise Against tour. When you're going from club stages to stadium stages and trying to work out, I've got all of this space on stage. What do I do with it?
And you still end up tripping into someone.
Yeah, you still end up tripping into someone or unplugging yourself.
Yeah.
What about you, Clarky?
Probably the same, just because obviously going to those venues as coming up in the scene, just as watching other bands and then getting to actually play those venues is one of those bucket list sort of things that you have for a musician. So yeah, that would definitely be my sort of favourite tour, hands down, sort of first experience.
I think like other honourable mentions though, I mean obviously those are the family favourites there, but I never forget our first tour.
Science tour. That was sick.
But not only was it like our first tour and like we like having to do it, but like it was the first time like I think any of us had ever done like 11 shows in 11 days type thing. It was like, which is unheard of in Australia. You never hear of that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was
It's a
hard.
really good thing.
Slow.
Or the other one, which is basically just a holiday.
The North Lane, that was a great tour. It was what was that,
Oh,
back in 2000? We got to go to
15.
16, it was, 2016. Started 2016, we toured a regional with North Lane.
This is the best holiday place in Australia.
Yeah, and it was pretty much, I guess Josh probably booked that tour or something, and it was like every show there was a week of downtime between each venue. So we were like in Ellie Beach for a week, just hanging out in the pool, drinking 4X's, and then play a show, going to waterfalls. Our old guitarist got an ear infection in the waterfall mid-tour. Yeah, that was a good one as well.
Yeah, that was good.